All right, hello everyone. 2 more lectures left, then 2 more days of presentations. I hope your final projects are doing well. Let me know if you'd like more office hours. I'll schedule some for Thursday, like I did in the previous week. But now you should be in a place where you're coordinated with your teams and starting to make progress. I've looked through all of your proposals, and they all look fine. There's really nothing I would. So here I would like you to have your own vision, and if it's a little too highly scoped for class, we'll see how far you get. This is about learning and delving into a space. There will be some notes I will give you. Adam, have you had a chance to look at these yet? Okay.
They look pretty good to me.
Yeah, I think everyone did pretty well. I think the examples that we gave them from last class, in last classes, proposals that went through iteration, I think really helped nail this. So once again, you are kicking last class's butt yet again. So thank you for being awesome. We will make some minor notes on those and send them back to you, but you're all, I think, pretty clear to move forward.
The scope looks good.
Yeah, no one, you were all respectful of your time.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about moving to 3D. I won't belabor it too much since we had some 3D information before. So let's get started. So, Flatland. Has anyone read the book Flatland or saw any of the film adaptations? Familiar with the concept? 2D entities interacting with 3D entities?
This or describe this to me.
Then go away!
Hasn't it occurred to you that you could move in some other direction, towards which your side is facing?
What?
Never.
What do you mean by side?
This is a two-dimensional entity talking to a one-dimensional entity.
Fine. Let me show you. Here, I'm going to move into your world. Here I come. There. Can you see me now?
Yes?
But
You're only a point!
Well, to you I'm only a point, but in fact I moved into Lineland. Now, I'm going to continue to move, and from your perspective, I'm going to vanish. What did your majesty say now?
Charlatan!
tricks!
Come back!
How did you do that?
I moved out of Lineland.
If
Convinced?
you had any sense, the smallest particle of...
You ask me to believe that there's another world? You say there's another motion besides forward and backward.
But when I ask you...
Right, so you can see how they're building this up to this concept of entities that can only see in 2 dimensions and move forward and backward, only see up or down that line. And then we have a 2-dimensional being coming in with width and height intersecting with that. And now we've seen this a little bit when we talked about graphics previously, about how a 3D intersection or a 3D object intersects the 2D world. And then we saw Megakure with 4-dimensional objects interacting with a 3-dimensional world projected onto a 2-dimensional screen, right? There was a Simpsons episode about this. Discovers there's more dimensions. So the idea here is that we want 3D. I always mess this up because I'm so used to OpenGL. WebaGL. So we need a 3rd dimension. We're dealing with X and Y. Our sphere, our circles, our ellipses, our rectangles, they had a position X and Y. Now, if you want a 3rd dimension involved, you need another number to represent that other dimension. Here we use Z. So here you can set your modes. One more time. I'm so used. Canvas, create canvas. I'm doing a lot in both types of these. So for when you're using the Java version of processing, you'll set the size of the canvas and you'll set the screen, the drawing type to P3D. But here at Create Canvas, where we're in P5.js, we're dealing with Canvas, which is a browser object. And because we're on the web, instead of using OpenGL, we're using the web port of OpenGL called WebGL. And so we have X and Y being the screen height of WebGL. This is now a surface that will be interpreted with 3 dimensions. It'll be using the OpenGL pipeline that we looked at with the viewing frustum, a camera, taking objects in 3 dimensions and projecting them down to 2D, all that matrix stuff we looked at before. You'll enable that. And a lot of the commands extend naturally. So translate instead of just using X and Y, we'll now use X, Y, and Z, right? So rotation is interesting because you only have 1 degree of freedom to rotate, either clockwise or counterclockwise in 2 dimensions. But now you can rotate with 2 degrees of freedom. We've added another degree of freedom to open up to. So you can rotate around any one of the 3 axes, X, Y, or Z. Rotate, by default, we'll move around the origin of the Z-axis. But if you need to rotate differently, you can rotate rectangles by translating to the center of the rectangle, rotating 45 degrees, so same as before. But now we have different functions to use. Instead of just rotate, we can now specify which axis you rotate around, whether it's rotation X around the X-axis, around the Y-axis, or around the Z-axis. Have any of you ever flown a plane? No pilots in the house? Oh yeah, do you know what gimbal lock is? Does anyone know what gimbal lock is? It's where you can use the gimbal or the apparatus in the plane that allows you to control rotation. What is it? Pitch, pan, and yaw. And if you get 2 of the axes completely aligned, there's a property where you'll lose degree of freedom, you lose control of one of the axes. And this also holds true in mathematics, where you'll start getting 2 of the axes multiplying by 0, and then the axes will cancel out, and you only have rotation left in one of the axes. So that's kind of neat. It also holds true in the math that a lot of folks use for rotation in 3D, and this is why we have fancy things like quaternions for those of you who have used game engines. It's using complex numbers to get around gimbal lock. But that's sort of like an interesting thing to sort of maybe enrich that. That will not be on the exam. Now, for rotations, order matters. Right, for translation, it doesn't. You'll end up in the sum of all the translations by the end. So if you translate 1010 and then 1010 more, it's the same as translating 2020. But if you rotate around X by 10 and then Y by 10, you'll be in one configuration. But if you flip that around and do Y by 10 then X by 10, you'll be in a different orientation. So these are not cumulative. Now, that's interesting, right? So there's a larger configuration space we have to deal with. There's more nuance there for us to play with. So if you want an idea of how these rotations work, here's a simple drawing. You can see when you rotate around the y-axis by 90 degrees, you're seeing how we go from this image to this. So we're just taking the y-axis, it's 0, 0 origin, and we're just simply rotating the world around it in a counterclockwise way. So 90 degrees. Took it from being like over here like this, rotate around 90 degrees to be in this orientation. And then if you did Z by 90 degrees, you'd now rotate around this Z axis, which would take it from here 90 degrees counterclockwise in this direction, and you'd be in this orientation. But if you flip those around, you'll see first you rotate around the Z, which would take this 90 degrees this way, end up right here. And then when you rotate around Y 90 degrees, it would simply flip it back up and make it like level with what we see as a floor or at the ground. I won't ask you to do this in class. We spent more time on this last year. But this is important. Like if you have a laser pointer and it's along the x-axis, what would you do? What rotations would you do on it to make that laser hit 10, 10, 10, the point 10, 10, 10, and point at it exactly? It's a little thought exercise for you. You can scale. Now instead of just scaling along horizontal or vertical, now you can scale along any one of the dimensions, just like we saw in our matrix the other day, X, Y, or Z. You can squish it, stretch it, pull it. These transformations are stored in the matrices. And now this is like push and pop here should make a little more sense if you look at this from a matrix perspective, right? So what we're doing here, what we're pushing and popping is actually the matrix of configurations that we built up by multiplying matrices together, as opposed to like individual commands, right? So when you push, you're saving the state of your transformation matrix. By default, it's an identity matrix, 1, 1, 1. There's been no modifications to it. But if you rotate it and translate it, you'll add some more numbers to that matrix. Right? And every time you push, you'll save the current state of the matrix, and every time you pop, you'll go back to that save, the previous save state, a little stack of states. So it's the same as we did in 2D. But now it's even more useful. I want to show you an example of simple explosions. I'll just cut into some examples, but here is sort of like what some of this 3D code looks like. What we're doing here is we are translating to the center of the screen. So we put our thing we're going to explode in the center, and then we actually run through, we're actually exploding a rectangle into tiles. And so we're going through for each tile, just like we made the grid of squares before in 2D in our lab. We're doing the same thing here, but we're dealing with little tiles in 3 dimensions. And then we're translating them, making sure we're in the right place. And then we are simply moving them and rotating them to explode them. We're basically changing their orientation and location to make it look like they're blowing up everywhere. Let's take a look. Simple explosion. All right, I'm gonna click the mouse. And the code for that is just this. This is our explosion code. Pardon me. We're going through, and after we click, we're into explosion mode. So by clicking, we are setting our run sim variable to true, our simulation of explosion. And this is where we make count go forward, and all the explosion relies on count. And so we're doing a rotate in the middle. Each one of those squares is a place in left and right. So we have some two-dimensional matrices here that we're pushing new matrices onto, and then setting them up appropriately, filling them all full of like some random speed and translation values, so they're not all exploding with the exact same orientation and rotations in both X and Y. And after we have this all set up, we can translate each one of them by where they're offset in the world, by we're looking at their speed, just like we do with all the other animations we've done, and we rotate each one of those squares by its own rotation factor. And so, a little simulation of an explosion. Not something I'd put in my VFX for my game quite yet, but this is a base that you can work from. And if you want to explode something for your final project, maybe this will help you out. All right, so 3D primitives, we'll take a look at these, are things like boxes and spheres. Does anyone remember what the most simple structure is in 3 dimensions? They're tetrahedra, like the little pyramid shapes. And you can draw wireframes by setting stroke or no stroke with your basic 3D drawing. And you can set surface textures or surface colors by using fill. Right? This is simple now. We talked about UV mapping and how textures work with objects before, but this is simply filling them full of solid color, just like we've done with rectangle, square, and ellipse. So it's like a movie set, right? You need to have like 3D graphics. You have to have your set pieces that you want to put in particular locations. It's like setting a stage, right? If you want a tree in your level, you need to know where the tree is, and you have to have the model for the tree. You have to have the prop, the thing that defines a tree, that lets you draw a tree. You have to have it, and you have to put it in the correct place. And then you also have to have lights to be able to see the stage. And you have to have cameras in order to provide a perspective of where you're looking in the scene. So 2D images sort of like 2D versions of processing sort of fudge over this. There's an implicit camera that's static and defined that is simply looking down onto like basically a sheet of paper. And everything there's nothing that has depth to it. So there's no perspective to make things small in the distance and greater than the front. It's all orthographic. Right? But now we're in 3 dimensions and we have light sources. That means we get shadows. That means we get, perhaps in your fancier rendering systems, caustic effects, like the little patterns of light made on the ground when there's a glass of water near a window. and the light shines through the glass of water and makes all the little ripple effects that you can see with light. This means we got to figure out what the heck does it mean when light hits a surface. Well, we have default lights, which are simply just a flat lighting, ambient lights, which are sort of just a broad light in the scene that doesn't really have a discrete source. We have directional lights, like a spotlight, or you can think of directional light. The classic example of this is outdoors, and the directional light is the sun, a large light that illuminates everything. You have point lights, which are like if you just had a light bulb, that was a point light. Spotlights, which are like light bulbs or cylinders of light that you can shine in directions. And then you have things like specular color, and those are like the highlights that you see when you shine light on a metal. Right? You can see that there's some specular highlight on these metal plastic bins. You can see there's a little bit of light reflection coming out of it in certain points, but you can see there's much less of a specular highlight on the concrete. Right? There's not a lot of individual light being focused in a particular area into your face. Yes?
Is specular color actually emitting light, or is it just creating that illusion?
So what it is so just like light works for us, light hits a surface, and then the light reacts to that surface. Some of it's reflected back, some of it isn't. Some wavelengths are absorbed, some are not. If all like the red is absorbed, you get something back that looks more blue. Right? So that's what we're doing here. Specular color is basically saying what color of light reflects back off an object. So let's create some 2D objects. So here, you can do things like with begin shape and end shape, and then you add vertices. So we looked at this a bit. This is saying, hey, make a vertex. The first point in the shape is at point 50, 50. The next one is going down by 10 pixels, so 150 to 50, then 150 to 150, and then close. So we've made a rectangle. Under the hood, rectangle kind of works like this. Drawing the corners of the shapes, and then optionally you can fill, set stroke colors, etc. So you can construct whatever polygon you want from this, whatever shape you'd like. And there's just an implicit close at the end where that 150, 150 will draw a line straight back to 50, 50, or the starting point. But just like we saw the other day, there's a lot of other ways you can interpret vertices. You can do them as points, disconnected points, or lines, or triangles, or a triangle fan, strips, quad strips. Lots of things we can do, full-on polygons. And curve vertex. You can also use a curve vertex to connect the dots with curved lines instead of straight lines. And there's some parameters you can set that kind of look like, for any of you who've done any drawing in 3D or 2D programs, Bezier curves. Now, it's too time consuming to put all the points in for your models by hand. This is why we have programs to help you with this. Maya, 3ds Max, Blender. All of these allow our tools for configuring a bunch of points in space and showing their relationships to one another. And then you can export those as things like OBJ files, which you can read into things like processing in P5 and show those things you rendered in Blender in your own P5 app, in your own sketch. All right. So that was the high level that I wanted to show you about this. There's a couple more examples I want to give you before we get into talks about animation. Where did we go? Did I just close it all? Okay. Oh, I closed the entire class. Let's see. Aha, excellent. Look at all these sketches we did. It's a lot of sketches. Good job. Okay. So, basic line drawing. You can make your own lines, you can make your own sketches. It's quite straightforward, just like we talked about before. We have begin shape and end shape. And then you just specify some vertices in there. Right? So I encourage you to go look at this sketch and then look at the drawings here and see what you can do to reconcile what you see here with what you see here. The first one's pretty easy. The rectangle, right? Or the triangle, like we did just a minute ago, and I called it a rectangle because sometimes I get ahead of myself. But we interpret this as a triangle. No, I'm sorry. That was a triangle. We only had 4 points, or only 3 points. We need 4 for a rectangle. So here, we're interpreting these 3 points as a triangle, and it's being closed, right? 50, 150, 150, 150, right? And then we have things like doing connected lines with lines. And then you can use lines in all sorts of ways. Here, we're making our own line fan because we're always coming back and connecting one end of the line back to 500, 100, which is this point right here. And we draw 11 lines sticking out of it. Right, so basic drawing of lines with OpenGL, WebGL style drawing in 2D is pretty simple. Now 3D, all you have to do is add a third coordinate and make sure you call it in WebGL mode, and you're good to go. We're still using WebGL here, but we're only using X and Y. I guess we're giving, we're only using X and Y's in these examples. You can give it Z's as well. All right, so here's some basic rotation. Notice they're wireframed. I have a bit in this. You can turn on the lights with this bit of code by clicking. You can see there's a little bit of shading that happens over top. But you can see this isn't spinning. This is spinning. The rotation code. Is right here. And basically, we're just spinning frame count and frame count times 2 degrees on X and Z. Pretty straightforward rotation. We're drawing a sphere at the sphere location. We're doing the rotation, then we're drawing the box. So the sphere is drawn before the rotates happen, so it's not being rotated. The box is drawn after the rotations happen, so it is being rotated. All things you can manipulate and use. Now this one I want to show you because it shows how lights work. So now I'm attaching a point light that's being modified by the location of the mouse when you drag. So you can see the lights moving around. Corresponding to where the X position of the mouse. So it doesn't matter where it is, X or Y, on the Y axis. But on the X axis, you can see our lights moving around. So you can get cool lighting effects that just work in P5. Okay. That was a little bit of a whirlwind, a little bit of code. I wanted you to have some small examples that you could work with for those of you who wanted to work 3D or have some small 3D aspects in your final project. Any questions about 3D? All right, let's go to animation. There we go. Let me just refresh this. I don't want to like scare you too much, but that's actual game footage. This was a, when games went to 3D, things were a little weird for a while. This is an example of an older Sherlock Holmes game where you had a companion character, Watson, that was supposed to help you out on like this, classic set of mysteries, mystery solving, probably it's Moriarty or something, right? The problem is they didn't have a good way to keep Watson synced up with the player. So what they did was, hey, if you got too far from Watson, or if Watson got out of your visual cone, simply just move Watson, make him heal. Just put you right behind the character. Turns out, not the intended gameplay effect that they were going for, and this game shipped like this. So getting your animations correct and your spatial visual information and your experiences is really important. But let's go back to traditional animation for a moment. Because you're all cinema and digital media folks, how many of you have encountered the Disney's Illusion of Life book? Oh, one? Okay, we got someone in here. Now, this is a really interesting book, The Illusion of Life, Disney Animations. It's this catalog of like what animators were thinking while they were doing their practice. What sort of lessons have they learned? Abstractions have they made? Tools in the toolbox of animation have they discovered? And let's go over a few right now. So one, you may have seen before, squash and stretch, right? We're deforming objects for motion effects, like these two dancing. Their bodies are changing all over the place. If they had bones, they'd be broken. Anticipation. Right, we're building a sense of anticipation by managing movement over time, as you can see by the small Unity animation in the top left. With Thumper. Staging. Right, this isn't so much as animation, but placement within a scene. Which is important as it is in visual design, as it is in animation. I guess it's the visual design implemented inside of animation. Pose to pose, going from interesting point to interesting point, and what happens in the transitions between them. Can also be noted as keyframes for those of you who have done some keyframe based animation. Motion to follow through. Rapunzel's hair flowing in the wind. This was like groundbreaking at the time, right? Rapunzel's hair modeling. But you can see it at the top where the motion stops and then the spring is happening on the rectangle. Slow in, slow out, a sense of acceleration and movement. I always thought this scene looked a little doofy, but different times. Arcs, motion. Because we have arms, and arms are radially attached, we see arcs quite well. I think this is a very, very human thing. And you can see Epic Mickey here going through and casting spells in Fantasia. Secondary action. This is one of my favorite. The tail falling after the tail and the leg falling over after the rollovers happened. After Effects. It's completely adorable. Timing. I mean, who doesn't remember this one, right? It just makes you want to smile. And it's just that slow motion. Works quite well. Exaggeration. I would expect nothing less from a genie voiced by Robin Williams. Oh, jeez. And I wouldn't expect me to not actually hit the escape button. Solid drawings. So things that are sort of solid and move but are deformed. We can do this better with technology now. Appeal. Adding a little bit of visual interest to the scene. But there's other ways of seeing this as well. There's actually been psychological work done. Seeing how we interpret shapes and movement. I'm going to play this clip for you and see, and I want to know how you interpret it. We get rid of the buzzing noise. There is actually no sound to this. It's from an old movie reel. There we go. What happened? What was your interpretation? Those were shapes moving around. Some of them didn't even move until the very end. What story can you tell from that? Yeah?
The big triangle wanted to beat up the other shapes.
It really...
was scared of them.
Exactly. It looks like one could see as a bullying scenario. Perhaps unhappy marriage. Unhappy relationship. I think it was if you read the paper that goes along with this, I think that was one of the more common interpretations. Anyone have any other interpretations of this? Yeah.
No pun intended, but a love triangle.
Love triangle. Yeah. Oh, nice. That'd be the first time someone's actually said that in class. Well done. You can intend the puns. It's fine. Yes. Containment breach. Yeah. The larger triangle got locked in and busted its way out. I've heard people thinking that the circle stole from the square. They make backstories behind these geometric shapes. Right. So I mean, this is a lot of interpretations. There's a lot of emotive qualities, a lot of anthropomorphic qualities that you can imbue with simple shapes through motion. And I think this the Hydra symbol experiment was 1944. The illusion was interesting. But talking about motion,
or lifeless. In this paper, we present the cartoon animation filter, a simple filter that takes an arbitrary input motion signal and outputs motion data that is more alive or animated. The animation filter adds anticipation, exaggeration, and follow-through.
So this is a machine learning model that learned how to manipulate motion curves for this effect. And you can see
change is a time shift
what it does.
Points on the boundary of the object. The filter applied to points at the leading edge is shifted earlier in time, thus these points anticipate the impending acceleration. Trailing edge points are affected later. This results in effective squash and stretch.
So what's neat about this, let's see. Yeah, we'll show some of these.
To show off pictures from a recent trip to Venice. Here is the exaggerated version with squash and stretch.
Here we go, from video cuts.
The objects are simply two-dimensional shapes per frame. These shapes can have the same filter applied to enhance their motion. We see the original footage and exaggeration with squash and stretch.
Bones
In a side-by-side version, we can more closely observe the differences. Here we have cut out the girl on the monkey bars, filtered the motion, and reinserted it onto the same background. Surprisingly, the filter can also be applied to animation generated by a motion capture system. We can see the original motion captured walk along with the filtered version offset from it.
Now you've probably seen a lot of generated videos and generated rigs, motions, and models now, but this is sort of one of these papers, one of these research findings, about 10-ish years ago that really got some of this started. So it's good to go back and see like what's actually happened, like the advances that made these sorts of things possible. Now we have a lot of expressive motion, particularly done by NVIDIA's labs, that have done some really interesting things. If any of you go to GDC this week, you're going to see a whole bunch of it. Or GDC in finals week. All right, so motion's important. Let's take a look to see how people have interpreted animation in the context of computation. So we're not talking about just any old animation here. We're going to look at a little bit of the history of things that are computer animations. There's a deep computational background to them. This is the first example I can find of CG in film. This is Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Alfred Hitchcock presents Vertigo. And there's the spirograph. At that point, I'm not sure how they transferred the generated images to film, onto film. I'll have to look that up and see if I can find what they did. Does anyone know? Right, next to that is the first digital photograph taken. I think Russell Kirsch's child, if I remember correctly. But that was 1957. That's quite a long time ago. Now the Swedes were on this, and of course, they used CG to do highway planning. So they used the best computer and an oscilloscope, just like we saw with Tennis for Two, to generate the animation of a bridge they were going to build. You can see the frame rate in the top left. So, early computer animation. You can also see an animation by a different group of folks about orbital mechanics.
This is a computer-made movie. The box represents a satellite, which is now in a circular orbit going over the pole. In the upper right, a clock counts off the number of orbits. Gravity gradient torques force the satellite's long axis to point toward the Earth.
Get the idea. It's the same, pretty much the same animation over and over again. It's a close up. This is the first computer animation using some tooling of drawing a cat and then having that cat be digital and have that digital thing printed out and being used as an animation. It's a little scary. Using differential equations to model cat motion. They did a lot of math to pull this off. Of the 1968 Russian aesthetic, Soviet Union aesthetic. Now, this is one of the first actual films called Hunger by Folds, made by the Canadian Arts Commission, CAC. I'll have to double check that. Commissioned by them. And this uses line drawing and morphing of lines to create animations over time. So you can see what this is like. Definitely a commentary on greed and excess. This is one of the earliest CG movies. It was, completely CG that I could find. Right? Lots of artistic affordances here. And also just all the lines, they simply move around. They're all morphing and swapping and shifting. Extra mouths appear. Extra hands. Extra gluttony. Better eat it all. Don't leave anything left. Gets weird. But then there are consequences. So I had to, the coincidences were too striking for me when I saw this for the first time. But now you can see, there it is. It's in, there's the Council of National, the Research National Council of Canada. Oh, it's right here in English. Right, so you can see how we've went from that cat image in Russia to gluttony and the consequences of it, where the haves or have-nots eat the have.
The technique we're using here has become known as morphing.
Then we go to the 80s.
That's short for transformation or metamorphosing. We'll select the eyes and the mouth and the nose, and then we let the computer run the transformation. It can take 4 or 5 hours just to run the frames for a second of transformation.
James Brown here.
There were also full CG scenes that were all computer animated. This is from Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. There we go.
The Lucasfilm Graphics project created 2 sequences for the movie Star Trek II. First is a retina identification scan of Admiral Kirk's eye. Each frame of this sequence required an entire assembly line of programs. For example, the frame being generated in this animation uses 50 such programs. The source material is a digitized photograph of one of our retinas. The Retina ID sequence is a good example of 2-dimensional computer graphics. After Kirk successfully passes the eye test it represents, he is allowed to see the so-called Genesis demo videotape. The contents of this tape, which are key to the movie, is the other sequence created by the graphics project. It is edge-of-the-art, 3-dimensional computer graphics. We fly toward a dead moon-like planet, shown here in the real-time line drawing form which we used to design the complex camera maneuver. The Genesis bomb, fired from our imaginary spacecraft, impacts where the spike is drawn. Fire spreads from this point to cover the planet as we speed by at 50 to 100,000 miles per hour. It disappears behind the limb of the planet momentarily, then makes a dramatic reappearance close up to engulf the camera. We used a wall to represent the leading edge of this flame. The wall of fire overtakes the camera and forces it toward the mountains which are growing from the now molten surface of the planet. They rise toward the speeding spacecraft. Early on, we actually hit a mountain. The mountains cool from the rise, immersing mountain peaks. The atmosphere thickens. As we pull away from the planet, we notice it has become alive and Earth-like. This is the so-called Genesis effect, on which the plot turns. It is a powerful and coveted phenomenon which instantaneously transforms death into life. To convey the notion of the Genesis effect, we chose to use the visual language of a planetary flyby, simulated scenes.
There, here it is with textures.
Here is the Genesis demo, as shown curved. The stars have their proper color and magnitude and are as seen from the nearby solar system of the star Epsilon Indi. Watch for motion blur of the stars.
It makes a little more sense when you can see everything going on. And instantly trees. Now this is a more mathematically oriented one, but this was made here. So we had a
I read somewhere
before
that
some retirements we had like
mathematicians
one
can
of
turn
the
a
best
sphere
graphics departments.
Yes, that's true.
In the
What's
nation.
the big deal? Just poke a hole in it and pull it through.
Sure, but the point is to do it without making a hole.
But then it seems impossible.
You're right. You cannot do it with an ordinary sphere, like a basketball. You have to understand the rules of the game. This sphere is made of an abstract elastic material that can stretch and bend and pass through itself. But you cannot rip or puncture this material without destroying it. And you cannot crease it or bend it sharply.
If the surface can pass through itself, what's the problem?
Do you think allowing self-intersections makes it easy? Try it.
I'll push the two halves right through each other.
Be careful. What about that ring around the equator? Remember, you mustn't tear or crease it.
Let me try again.
So this gets complex.
So we'll split the screen to see what's going on. On the right, the camera tracks the ribbon from above, so its apparent size does not change. This overhead view highlights the symmetries that are hidden in the side view on the left, where we see the position of the ribbon in space.
That's a lot of work for flipping a sphere inside out. Now, one of my favorite examples, this is, so I wanted to show a bit of this because we talked about Berlin Noise and how it won a Technical Academy Award. Academy Award for Technical Excellence. And this is the movie it was used in. And this was a scene that did use some Berlin Noise, but only for the particle effects, I believe, and some of the background. But it's still one of the more iconic version, one of the iconic early CG scenes, I think, in existence.
Prepare to transport to light cycle grid. We have transport.
Sark, Flynn, Tron, nameless red shirts.
This is Blue Leader to Blue Bikes. Run these guys into your jet walls.
Copy, Blue Leader. Copy, Blue Leader. This is Gold 1 to Gold 2 and 3. Split up. Take them one-on-one.
It's like snakes, but dangerous.
Watch it, watch it.
Greetings, programs.
Video Game Warriors.
Classic
leaving
line.
Game Grid. This is an illegal exit. You must return to Game Grid. Repeat. This is an illegal exit. You must return to the grid.
Those demons are coming down.
Get them. Send out every game tank in the grid. Get them!
And unlike CG you see these days, you can pretty much guess like where the vertices and edges are. It's all flat shading, there's not much texturing going on. So this is like something with enough effort you could just recreate with what you know right now in P5. The tanks are a little more detailed than everything else. Curves, specular highlighting. That sweet reticle. The sweet synthetic music.
Target units accelerating. Pursuit force, -1 tank. Close ranks.
Right, so you saw a lot of CG here, yes.
Have you seen the Legacy movie, the sequel?
Yeah.
Because you know how when a program dies in that movie, like they like kind of break into pixels.
Yeah.
Do you think they would have like been able to pull that off in this one, like with the animation they had?
Okay, so the derezzing is what they called it, I believe, in the fictional world, is different in this. We can find a video of it, but there are they sort of like turn into like a glowing and through into spheres. It's not exactly pixels. Like they did a much with many more tools to pull off that derezzing in a more spectacular way in Legacy. This more like fuzzy particles.
Yeah, but like with what they had in this one, do you think they would have been able to pull off having that type of derezzing?
I don't think so. Mostly because they probably didn't know the aesthetic. There wasn't that aesthetic mapping of like 8-bit pixel type entities in the world. Like this, there was like at this point in games and CG, like there was barely even a notion of tiles, and most games were still like Pac-Man or like Snake-like things like Centipede, right? So there wasn't this notion of like pixels and tiles being thought together and used in that same aesthetic. I think they would have the tech to pull it off. It would have taken a lot of computational power in their effort at their point. I mean, processors. Okay, how fast do you think processors were in the 80s?
I remember my 386.
What was that? How many hertz was your 386?
Oh man, I don't even remember. The 386 was top of the line too.
Yeah. Back to an x86 number, that showed how fast your computer was. So in the 90s, when the Pentiums first came out, Intel's first big processor that was really renowned came out, it was a whole 9 megahertz. No, 75. 9 was the one before that.
Yeah,
75 megahertz. That was like 15 years after this. So they had roughly, 100 kilohertz to work with. Your phones have like at least 2, 3, 4 gigahertz processors. Probably 2, 1.5, 2 in most phones. Right? That's a lot of differential in processing power, which is why they probably couldn't have pulled it off. They may have not had enough memory. Depends on how many individual portions they needed to distribute the derezzing into. But I think they used a different technique. Good question. Now something else I want to point out. See how the outfits glow? That wasn't CG. That's rotoscoping, where they actually had someone go in and draw over each of the images. So every frame of this movie where they're in the virtual world where they're in these outfits, someone drew neon or lighter colors over the borders of the suit and had to make it so that it looked good from frame to frame. Sometimes you'll see it pop around and hover a little bit. And because the rotoscoping, that's why everything looks a little dark and funky. And rotoscoping has been quite a tool. Like taking motion and frames of motion and turning them into something that's animated. Like rotoscoping's been used for that for a while. Like in Lord of the Rings in 1978. Have you seen this?
This way! Frodo!
Frodo! Those are orcs. So these were human actors that they took, film on. They actually shot film, and then they drew over it. They animated over top the film to get this rotoscoping effect. Boromir! If you want to kick, look at the Balrog from this movie sometime. It's probably the cutest, least scary Balrog ever. The Fall of Boromir. And then he blows the horn. Maybe we can find.
Ring from Frodo. I'm sorry.
Aragorn.
Pay. Aragorn.
So they mixed animation with rotoscoping for the live-action fight sequences. So this is animation, not rotoscoped. Right? So they flip between these two modes.
Aragorn. I will go. I promise you. The halflings. Orcs took them. I think they are not dead.
We can see, there's Legolas. And Gimli. A little different from the Peter Jackson versions. Oh, did it have the other one? I missed it. Fine. Boromir death. Whatever. Now, rotoscoping is still used.
Is that all you got?
Wait till the boss gets his hands on you.
You want some more?
Oh, you're going down.
Oh my god.
What?
Did you just kill him?
Yeah, I guess I did.
I mean, that guy single-handedly killed hundreds of our men.
I mean, he was just standing there.
I mean, did you punch him hard?
I guess. Just a standard punch.
I mean, do we still stand guard? That guy was the guy.
Yeah, that was the guy.
That was the guy this was all about. I mean, it's not like there's another guy.
I guess we should tell the boss.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Cool. Hey, boss?
What do you want? You should be guarding. He could show up any minute.
That's kind of the thing. He already was here.
Well, bring him in. I want to see him.
Well, we already took care of him.
You what?
Well, he was just standing there, and I punched him, and he died.
This is the same guy who chased us across 7 continents.
Yep.
Same guy who took down 30 of our helicopter.
Yeah.
The guy we shot with RPG, and he fall out the plane, into ocean, attacked by shark, on boat, and boat explode.
That's the one.
You punched him.
Mm-hmm.
And he died.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's good.
I mean, that's what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to guard the door.
I just had something set up.
So this is a modern use of digital rotoscoping.
So you're going to want to choose a frame from the shot that has the most face action. And by that, I mean you want the eyes open, you want the mouth open. Because your biggest enemies during this is going to be blinking and closing the mouth for syllables. Because as soon as that happens, the eyes and mouth are just gone and it looks like some horrible creature. Believe it or not, I do this whole thing on a mouse and keyboard, but you bring that frame into Photoshop, and what I do is I usually start by outlining the character in the shot, or the person. This usually takes a while. You outline the person, and then you could have some fun with this, you know, like the most extreme example is for the Scooby-Doo video. I wore a big fluffy hat, and then I used that for my head shape. So you don't have to adhere to the facial structures. You know, I usually make weird noses for demons, and I do, you know, you could have a lot of fun with the shape. I could look like this, but I could also use my face shape to make me look like this. Isn't that fun? That's crazy. So once you have this frame completed, fully colored and with a green screen, you open Absinthe, choose that as your keyframe, choose the folder of the shot you're doing for the shot, and then create a new folder for it to export the generated frames. The first couple videos I did, Absinthe was still in alpha and it took forever, but thankfully this process goes much faster in the beta and it's not a headache like it used to be, so that's awesome.
So yeah, rotoscoping is now for the masses. And so I want to leave some time for us to talk with groups like I promised. But if you have these slides, in here you'll see there's probably one updated recently. But this is like how video games changed graphics, how they were one of the main drivers of how graphics have changed over the years. The need to have things rendered in real time. Worlds, mountains, textures, players, bullets, particle effects, what have you, light, all of that sort of like drove graphics processing units for a very long time, up until, you know, maybe at most, or I guess furthest back is like 10 years ago, when crypto mining and artificial intelligence ran on these same bits of hardware, started becoming a major market driver. And now those are sort of like helping push forward, maybe more so than games, the innovation of that particular capability. So you can see some of these at the beginning. You remember this one? Tennis for Two. Space War, also in oscilloscopes. Some of you may know what that one is. So this is what I was talking about, where graphics didn't really have like tiles in the same way. All these are more vector artish games. This one definitely looks like a computer scientist made it. Boop, 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 boop. This niche, barely known game is called Pac-Man. And now we're getting to the arcade, the quarter crunchers here. The difference in graphics between this and what came before were quite astounding. And now we're getting the 80s, where now we're getting things look a little more pixelated. And, you know, like, well, Tron was already, at least in production, not made by this point. Yeah, I mean, most people haven't seen the arcade version of Punch-Out. Space Harrier, classic from the Sega days. So now you're seeing we're getting into this is what we call billboarded 2D or 2.5D, where things look a little 3D, but there's really just billboarded things getting bigger and smaller to show depth. Now we're getting some particle effects, a lot more billboarding, some more 3D action. So it was just 10 years between this and like Space Invaders. And now this is a true, like, early 3D game. See how low poly everything and how sparse everything is? This was pushing those 9 megahertz computers to their max. And games like this, while they look better, were actually easier or had lower computational loads because you're basically putting a bunch of sprites on the screen. You're not really rendering a bunch of 3D matrices. Also, a ill-known game here. And now we're getting into some little more famous 3.5 or 2.5D games. So we have Wolfenstein 3D, a precursor too. And now we're transitioning from the arcade games to console games and PC games. And Donkey Kong Country is interesting here because these are 3D rendered characters, but they took the renderings. So the renderings couldn't happen in real time, especially in the Super Nintendo. So they took pictures of the 3D models, renderings of the 3D models, and used those for frame animations. And here's where you could really have a LAN party. And now we're starting to get the 3D models with full textures, with more polygons, with some baked-in lighting. A little bit of particle effects here and there. Now these are usually arcade games where they were much more expensive, higher-powered machines than what you could get on your home consoles. But now, we're starting to get what the Unreal Engine was famous for. You can see this game just looks so much better than like all the other games that have happened before. Although by modern standards, it looks pretty niche. Unreal Tournament. My sister loved this game. Q3A. You're right. Q3A. Yep. This was also the year like The Matrix came out. Max Payne. We're gonna have some bullet time happen. But now you can see like video games and sort of like their cultural import. These were the things that were pushing forward what we could see. They were pushing forward graphics hardware, acceleration hardware, really to pull off better things like this. The innovation was happening very quickly in games. You know, in the matter of a decade, we went from something that could barely maybe do half, like a little bit of billboarded 3D, to like Splinter Cell. So the amount of processing power it takes to do something like this.
I presume.
And now a seminal game, one that
The Combine can be slowed away,
if you're a game
but
scholar, you
once
should
they're
definitely
up,
play.
You don't want to get in their way.
Now this was a famous game. It had a it broke grounds for its physics
My
engine.
father worked with you back in Black Mesa. I'm sure you don't remember me though.
Yeah,
And a few words, aren't you?
which was eventually acquired by Unity. Now you can see all the lighting effects. There's actually there's real-time lighting happening here. Physics effects happening. A lot of shading and bump mapping. Things that you just hadn't really seen in games before were appearing here. And they were all because of advances in OpenGL and graphics hardware. And now, like, maybe there's franchises you've actually heard of. I guess Gears of War 3 was still a long time ago, right? entirely too much shaky cam. And now Crysis was a game like sort of like beyond its time. Crysis was used for benchmarking games for a number of years, benchmarking hardware for a number of years. And it just had a lot of interesting algorithms and high-end graphics features that was well beyond the hardware at the time to pull off. You could play this game if you had like a $10,000 PC. Otherwise, you had to wait like 6 years. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Alright, so now we're into getting close to your living memories. So we'll stop here, give you a few minutes to coordinate with your teams, and ask any questions if you have any.